Start the video now. So welcome to Talking Data Equity for Friday, January 17th, 2025. My name is Heather Krause, and I'm a mathematical statistician, and I'm the founder of an organization called We All Count. The purpose of We All Count is to provide tools or support or training to anybody who's working with quantitative data that wants to align the quantitative data projects that they're working on with the values and the communities and the equity priorities that are attached to that data project that are appropriate in the context that they are working in. So that's the point of data equity. And one of the things that We All Count does most Fridays is we get together and we run this thing called Talking Data Equity, which you have found your way to. Some of you have been here lots and lots of times before, and welcome back. It would be nothing without the community. And some of you, I know, are here for the first time, so welcome. And the idea behind Talking Data Equity is that it is an informal drop-in space where anybody in any sector, in any country who is interested in trying to embed equity in their data projects has a place where they can drop in, ask a question, share resources, share tools, share experiences that are helping them improve their data projects. And also remember that you're not the only person. You're not alone. There's a whole community of people across sectors, across countries, who are all trying to figure out best possible ways to generate quantitative evidence while maintaining alignment with the values and priorities and equity goals of your project. So that's the point of Talking Data Equity. And the Zoom link stays the same. So now that you've successfully made it to Talking Data Equity, you can make your way back any Friday that it's convenient for you. I just put into the chat the link that you can use to see who's talking or what tool or technique we might be covering on any given Friday. So that can help you decide whether you want to attend that Friday. And as well, you'll find a form on that page where you can, you'll find the form on that page where you can subscribe to a calendar if you want to add it to your calendar. You can also use that form to make suggestions, what guests you'd like to see, what questions you'd like us to talk about. There is a lot of valuable information on that page. Last thing I'll say is that we do record, or not the last thing I'll say, I'm about to talk for a long time, but the last logistical thing I'll say is that we do record these sessions, and we record these sessions so that people who are interested but can't attend at this exact time and day have a place that they can go back and feel like they're a valued part of the community as well. All right. Somebody's asking for the phone number, and I'll be really honest, right now, I don't actually have access to what I need to have access to give you the phone number, but our tech team will work on it and I will try it. Oh, thank you, whoever did that. Leo, really appreciate it. Thank you very much for saving me from having to do that. I really appreciate it. See what a fantastic community this already is. Okay. So Talking Data Equity is really different from Friday to Friday. Some Fridays, we have a very specific technique. Some Fridays, we have a special guest. And this Friday, today, we are going to have a conversation about a question that people have been asking me every couple of hours in the past couple of weeks. 1 second. I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Hold on 1 second. Great. There we go. All right. Great. So today we are going to discuss something really important, which is how to talk about data equity in situations that might not feel easy or appropriate or safe to talk about data equity. And we're going to talk about why paying attention to data equity matters in any context. And we're going to give you a couple of kind of prompts that are going to help you figure out how to make the choices in your data projects that are going to be most supportive for you, because we are really aware that lots of stuff is changing. There are political changes, there are cultural changes, there are economic changes. And amidst all this change, we really want to work together as a community to figure out how can we retain these equity gains that we've made? How can we still achieve alignment between the goals of a project and what we do with the data that we have? So that's what we're going to be talking about today. And I brought some slides. I'm going to share some examples and whoops, sorry. I'm going to share some examples and some suggestions, and then we're going to make sure we leave time for questions and answers. Okay, so, oh yeah, I should say one more thing. Thank you. Logistically is that this is a meeting, so you can ask a question at any time. While I'm sharing my slides for the first portion of today, we prefer that you ask your questions and make your comments in the Zoom chat. And we have it set up that you can ask a question either with the drop-down menu set to everyone, which means everybody who's here and everybody that watches the recording can see your comments. Or if you want to just keep your comment or your question private, you can set that drop-down menu to say my name, Heather Krause, and then me and the We All Count tech team will be able to see your question or see your comment. Awesome. So we have people here who are really, really familiar with We All Count and the whole data equity framework idea. And we have people who are brand new. And we're really, really happy to hear that we have lots of people that are brand new. So I just want to kind of set the stage for this conversation by saying that the way that We All Count approaches embedding equity in a data project is by something that we call the data equity framework. And the purpose of the data equity framework is to give you a concrete, practical set of tools that will help you pay attention to the nitty-gritty specific choices that are getting made in your data project. And the reason why we think that this matters is that it's very easy to have a very nice narrative or some rhetoric around equity or community-centered evidence or participatory evidence generation. Those are easy words to say, but they are very challenging to actually embody when we're working with quantitative evidence, mostly because a lot of our conventional training isn't oriented around that at all. And so we often forget how many chances and choices we do have to center the equity priorities or the lived experiences that we're trying to center in our data. So we really focus on the step-by-step choices that are getting made in your evidence generation process. And this is good news because even though there's lots of choices that get made upstream from you and lots of choices that get made downstream from you, a lot of times there is at least one actual choice on your plate. I'm going to share with you a link to this. If you have attended our very first training, which is called the Data Equity Primer, you will have already seen this. This is a document called the First 99 Choices. which is not a comprehensive list of every choice that exists in a data project. And nor do we think that you should start paying attention to 99 choices all at once. But what this is a list of really common choices that we see our colleagues and clients make a lot. And hopefully you can see maybe one or two choices that occur in the portfolios and projects that you work on. So that's the idea behind this choice document. It's just like a seed planting, getting started style document. And I really learned about making choices in data projects and how easy it is to use quantitative data without equity. I learned that in a very unpleasant way. And if you've known me for a while, you will have already heard this story. The very first project that I worked on when I had just wrapped up getting my graduate degree in mathematical statistics was based in rural Bangladesh. Now, I live and work in Toronto, Canada, and I was given an opportunity to participate, to be the statistician in a dairy value chain project in rural Bangladesh. This is a project that was really designed to improve the lives of women that owned cows in rural Bangladesh by looking at all different ways to increase milk production, change the way that the dairy value chain was set up, and improve the lives of the women that owned the cows and their families. Okay, so this was a long time ago. I graduated from grad school a long time ago. So for its time, this project was collecting a lot of data. And that was the reason they needed a statistician. They would take data about cows, data about families, data about women, and they would send it to me in Toronto. I would run analyses on it. I'd make a report and I'd send it back. And they would take my results and they'd make recommendations. And this was going so well that after about 6 months, that's when I got to go and live and work in Bangladesh alongside the people whose data I was using and the people who own the cows and the cows themselves. And it was this shift that really opened my eyes to the fact that when I was getting that data back in Toronto, I was actually making decisions about how to handle that data, how to analyze that data, what to recommend based on that data that was actually harmful to the women that owned the cows, the women that were part of the program, the women that we were saying we were trying to make meaning with and for. And this was my kind of very first out of school introduction to the fact that if we didn't pay attention very specifically in a nitty gritty way to the choices that we were making with data, how we were building evidence, we could, even with a lot of nice education and good intentions, we could end up doing a lot of harm with quantitative data. So I'm going to talk to you for a second about this one specific choice that was going on in this project. Let's pretend that you are the director of this dairy project, and it's time for you to decide, is this project working? Is this dairy value chain pilot project working? Should we scale it up and spread it to more villages, more districts, more upazillas in Bangladesh? Or do we have to rethink how this project is going? And let's pretend instead of one answer or one report, you were given two. First report has analyzed all this really complicated data and has said dairy production has nearly doubled as the result of our training. We recommend expanding this program. So we've analyzed your data. Milk production's going up. This project is a huge success. You should bring it to more villages, more upazillas. Report number 2 uses the very same data set and reaches a very different conclusion. Report number 2 says, well, we've analyzed the data and our training has led to a negligible increase in productivity. We recommend that we have to rethink this program or retool it. So there's a big difference. There's not a mathematical error here. There's not a technical problem with the math. What there is there's a choice that's getting made in how the models are getting built. And there's a lot of different choices, but the choice we're going to talk about today, because we only have an hour together, is we're going to talk about the choice of where the model puts the variable that counts the number of hours the women in the program spend on dairy-related activities. So when we collected data, one of the data points we collected was how many hours are you spending on dairy-related activities? And both models controlled for this variable, but they controlled for this variable in very different ways. And that is a critically important choice. The way that we include variables in models, especially causal models, is essentially a political decision. It's a decision about what set of values or what lived experiences we're going to embed in the answers that we're generating. And the first model here decided to control for time spent on dairy activities in such a way so that they were generating an answer that would give them a measure of absolute milk produced, kind of siloed off from changes in the amount of time spent on dairy. The second model also included this variable, but it included it in a way so that they could see the increase in milk produced relative to the increase in time spent. Now, if you don't understand the technical ins and outs of that, that is okay. What I'm hoping will come across is that there was an important choice here in how to build a statistical model that could answer the question. And the choice was very, very nitty gritty. It was like how to include one specific variable in the model. And that choice led to a really big difference in mathematical results. One of those models says this project is going great. We should do more of this project. And another option within that choice said this model isn't really working. We should rethink it. Now, we were in a very fortunate position in this Bangladesh project that we could talk directly to the people that we were really trying to prioritize. Whether we were succeeding at prioritizing is a conversation, but we were trying to center the lived experiences of the women that owned the cows. So we got to go and talk directly with our colleagues, our partners in this project, and say, hey, what do you think is going on here in terms of why there's such a big difference in whether or not we think this project is working based on how we handle this data on the time spent on dairy? And the women in the project said, oh, we know exactly why. And that's because part of this project is like teaching us all these new ways to milk the cows, new ways to clean the cows, new things to feed the cows. And all of that's taking a lot of time. And so we're now setting our alarms for like 2-3 o'clock in the morning and getting up to take care of cows. So yeah, there's a nice increase in the milk produced, but that increase in milk produced is directly related to the fact that we're spending way more time. And then we got to ask them, do you think it's worth it? Is it worth it for you to set your alarm for 2 o'clock in the morning to get extra milk? That's a viable option. It just depends on what you want. And they said no. In general, the consensus was no, we do not. So that made it really easy for us to consider the options in our given choice. Our given choice is how are we going to construct this causal model and select the option that's going to align this quantitative evidence with the people whose lived experience we're trying to prioritize. And that's what we've talked about most Fridays here at Talking Data Equity, is how to do that. And now lots of us are facing a really big question, which is if our project is not quote unquote an equity project, should we skip using these tools? In other words, if I am no longer allowed to use the word equity at my job, should I still spend time paying attention to the choices and who and what the choices prioritize? Or if my funder or if my boss or if my colleagues don't consider my project to be an equity project, should I still spend time paying attention to the choices that are being made in the data project and how those choices are influencing mathematical outcomes and human outcomes? Or a similar question I'm getting right now is how do I write up a funding proposal? Or how do I write up a grant proposal? Or how do I get a project through the decision makers at my company that will allow me the time and the resources I need to pay attention to the choices that are getting made? And so we're going to talk a little bit about that today. Of course, you can already see from the chat, we could probably spend the next month talking about that, and we'll make sure that there are spaces. Um, exactly. So the answer is, of course, even if your project does not qualify as a quote unquote equity project, or your bosses do not allow you or want you to use the word equity, or your funders are saying like they're pivoting and they're now going to focus on something else, not equity, there is still a lot of good reasons and a lot of good ways to frame your need to pay attention to these choices. We are not going to lose all of our progress and all of our ability to pay attention to choices. And part of the reason why this is true is that paying attention to the choices and aligning the choices with the purpose and the context of the project is essential for equity. And it's also essential for things like accuracy, for things like risk management, for things like quality assurance, for things like usefulness, for things like replicability. There are lots of other reasons to use these tools that don't have to use the word equity. For example, if we stick with this Bangladesh thing, and we were trying really hard to produce evidence that centered the preferences and priorities of the women in rural Bangladesh that owned cows. That was the situation we were in. But what if we kind of just do a little experiment with thinking this through? What if this project, the cows weren't being taken care of by women? What if this is a future project and the cows are being taken care of by robots? So what if there are no humans involved in this project at all? And so we don't have the same immediate equity issue. Of course, there are still equity issues, but the immediate community that we're trying to center isn't a human anymore. Suddenly we have robots. So do we still need to pay attention to this choice of how to build this statistical model? Is it still worth our time as data practitioners to pay attention to the choice of how we're going to control for the number of hours being spent on taking care of cows in order to produce this milk? And the answer is yes. Even if there are no humans for us to prioritize, if we care about how much money we're making from selling the milk from these cows, we still need to pay attention to how we're going to build those models. If we just build one model that controls for the time that our robots are spending taking care of cows, if it controls for it only like model A did instead of like model B, we actually run the risk of losing a lot of profit. Also, what if these fancy new robots that we have that take care of cows need to charge at a charging station and they consume a certain amount of electricity that is quite expensive. If we fail to take that into account, if we fail to pay attention to that nitty-gritty nuanced choice of, are we going to control for the change in the time as a confounder or a mediator? If we skip that, we might actually tell our bosses, this is working great. Go ahead, put in your order for 100,000 new robots. We're going to get even more robots. And all of a sudden, our organization is bankrupt because actually those robots can't actually do what they're doing for an unlimited amount of time. We didn't think through what assumptions and priorities were getting baked into our model. So there are really important reasons that you do not have to use the word equity to justify why it's extremely important to use whatever tools you're using to help you notice the choices, document the choices, and make the choices in your data projects in a way that's aligned closely with the purpose and context of your project. Accuracy, usefulness, and reproducibility are three of them. They aren't the only three, but they're three really important goals of most data projects, even if the people around you are claiming that they do not care about equity. So let's look at a couple more examples and then we can have a conversation. Okay. So you may have seen this as well if you've been around We All Count for a while, but this is a predictive algorithm that a post-secondary school is using. So a university in the United States is using a predictive algorithm to help it understand how well a variety of students are doing. How quickly they're learning and what supports they might need in order to maximize learning. Now, when we're doing any work with a predictive algorithm, there are many choices that are getting made. So optimizing a predictive algorithm is very, very tricky. Anybody who says, it's a predictive algorithm, so it's value neutral, very much not true, deeply not true. And it's a much bigger deal than just the data's biased. The data is biased, that's true, but there are many, many choices in actually building and fine-tuning and optimizing a predictive algorithm that are also deeply laden with values. And in working with this college, one of the things, I always get switched back and forth between college and university because it's different in Canada and the US. This college/university realized that its algorithm was working very, very differently for students who were first generation. So they're first in their kind of family to attend education after high school than it was for students whose parents or grandparents had attended some kind of post-secondary college or university after high school. And so there was a really big difference in how well this predictive algorithm works. And that's one of the choices to pay attention to when you're using a predictive algorithm. No predictive algorithm works equally well for all kinds of people. And so that's a choice. And that is very usefully framed as an equity choice. Who are you trying to get this algorithm to work good for? But it does not have to be trained as an equity choice. It can also be framed as a usefulness choice, as an accuracy choice, as a reliability choice, as a reproducibility choice. For example, again, it's a good practice if you're trying to think how you're going to talk about this in certain settings. What would this project be like if there weren't humans? Now I'm using robots, but it doesn't have to, you don't always have to substitute humans for robots. But what would it be like if the immediate equity choice was gone? Like maybe we're trying instead with this predictive algorithm to understand how best to support the large the large language models that we're building and testing. If we just develop an algorithm that takes an average and we get an average idea of, oh, this large language model is doing great on this, and this large language model is doing great on this, and we don't pay attention to say whether the algorithm is working better for first generation large language models compared to second generation large language models, the results that we get are going to be unusable and inaccurate. The risks to applying this predictive algorithm are going to be large, and they're going to accrue to our organization. We're not doing proper quality control if we're not paying attention to the nitty-gritty choices that we're making. And that's really, really important for equity. And equity is hugely important. I am not saying we should stop caring about equity or that equity doesn't matter. For me, for talking data equity, it's a given. Equity is incredibly important, and equity really matters. What we're talking about today is if you find yourself in a bad situation where you have to justify using or getting resources or getting time for paying attention to choices, there are other ways to frame it rather than just throwing it out saying we can't do it. I'm going to show you one or two more examples, and then I'm going to turn towards the chat. So we work a lot with the genomics folks. Genomics is super important. It is incredibly important to pay attention to the choices that we are making as we're reducing a human being down to a couple, a couple of zeros and ones in their DNA. And we've seen what happens if, say, we're trying to answer a question about, does this new diabetes medicine work for people with type 1 diabetes? If we test this through very advanced, very complicated, very rigorous genetic testing, but we forget to look at the data biography of that genetic data, and we run these tests and we develop these drugs, and we do this precision medicine, quote unquote, using a gigantic library of genetic data that, despite the fact that it's gigantic, includes not nearly enough people who are Black or African American. What happens, and what happened in real life, is that we start building and prescribing drugs that cause severe bleeding problems in people who have not been included in the data set. And if we don't, again, this comes down to choices. One of the choices is whether or not, before we start using data, we make sure that we have a data biography. We have a really good understanding of who's represented in this data and how and why. That's an equity choice. And it's an accuracy choice. It's a precision choice. It's a usefulness choice. Let's say instead of trying to understand the medical needs of a human, we're trying to understand the fuel needs of tractors. And we get a huge, giant, commercial data set. We talk to all the big manufacturers of tractors. We get a big data set. We start feeding fuel into them, and we do a bunch of analysis. If we haven't paid attention to differences in what we're asking those tractors to do, the environment that those tractors are working in, and what kind of sort of context those tractors are being subjected to, if we don't write that down in our data set and include that transparent written down metadata with our results, we're then going to order a bunch of fuel for tractors that are supposed to work up in northern Canada based on results from tractors that have been, working down in Louisiana. It's not going to work. So this is, again, a choice, paying really close attention to where the data came from, what relationships gave rise to this data. Really important equity choice. This one in particular can be quite expensive and time consuming. But in addition to being a very important equity choice that you need time and money for, it's also critically important for risk management, for accuracy, for usability. Okay, I'm going to show you one more and then let's chat. My graphics person will be very, very happy to see this. I'll take a screenshot of this so that I can show it to him. Okay, one of the things that we talk about a lot, you've all been in conversations with me about this, or will be soon if this is your first time, what denominator we choose when we're doing descriptive analysis. This doesn't have to be fancy. This doesn't have to be a big, like some genetic multi-level model. It can be the count of how many people come to something. A choice about what denominator to use is absolutely an equity choice. When we decide what denominator to use, we're deciding who counts. We're deciding where the locus of power is. And a really common example of this is if I have a budget, I have a chunk of money, and I'm looking at people who need knee replacement surgery. And I'm trying to decide how to deploy the funding that I have to improve the situation with people who need knee replacement surgery. And I look at wait times, how long people are waiting for this knee replacement surgery. Whether I use the denominator of individuals that need knee replacement surgery, or whether I use the denominator of doctors who are providing knee replacement surgery, or if I use the denominator of hospitals that do knee replacement surgery, or if I use the denominator of healthcare system that does knee replacement surgery, each one of those denominators is going to produce a different answer. And where I'm going to put my money is going to be different. And we've talked in the past, and if you're new, I'm happy to give you links to videos where you can watch us talking about it, about if we choose this denominator without paying attention to the communities that are going to be impacted differently by the selection of different denominators, we're going to run into equity issues. We can do stuff like accidentally make health disparities worse by choosing a denominator that's not aligned with the purpose and context of our data project. So we know how to make an equity case for this. But what if, again, we're in a very unpleasant situation where we're not allowed to use the word equity, or if we say it's because of equity, we're not going to get the money? Let's imagine, what if the person that needs a knee replacement surgery is a robot? What if we're talking about, our fleet of robots that are taking care of cows, and we want to keep their knees in good shape so they can take care of their cows, our cows? The equity issue goes away a little bit. It becomes at least pushed further down into where the choices are getting made. The denominator that we use when we decide where the money is going to go is going to matter to the efficiency of our operations. So if we want to prioritize having the most number of robots working all at once, or if we want to prioritize the efficiency of the doctors or the, mechanics that are doing the knee replacement surgery, the denominator will be different. So the goals of our project, even if there are goals about efficiency or goals about profit or goals about milk production, not necessarily directly related to human equity, we still have to pay attention to that choice. And even if we take all the humans out of the equation and we have one robot that's doing knee replacement surgery on another robot, when we decide where to take the money that we have to fix our robots' knees, when we use the denominator of robots, we're going to get a different answer than if we use the denominator of the robot fixing machine. And we're going to get a different answer than if we use the denominator of factory. And so that choice, that very seemingly simple choice about what denominator should we use, Absolutely, we need the time, the money, and the competency to notice that choice, document that choice, and make that choice in alignment with the goals and context of the data project. And the reason that I like to learn how to do all of these things and work together with you folks to learn how to do all these things is because it's really, really good for equity. And equity is really important to me. But the good news is that not only is paying attention, documenting, and making these choices really good for equity, it's also essential for stuff like accuracy, for stuff like precision, for stuff like usefulness, for stuff like rigor. So we may be in for some tough sledding, but that does not mean that we have to give up the skills that we've learned, the tools and processes that we've developed that have helped us learn how to figure out where we are in a data project and what choices are probably on our plate and why those choices matter, and make sure that we document those choices so that when it comes time to make a decision based on our quantitative output or deploy resources based on our data projects or inform policy or practice based on our data projects, if the choices have been documented, we have a much better chance of producing work that is equitable and also is accurate, is useful, is rigorous, has passed the quality assurance checks, and can be repeated if necessary when we have a different context or slightly different question. Okay, so I'm going to pause and we're going to use the rest of our time together for a conversation. I can see that there's conversation in the chat. We had a lot of people join as we were going through. So I'm going to make sure before I open it up to anybody who wants to talk, I'm going to share the beginning links. Here's the getting started choices checklist. But more importantly, here is the data equity community forum, where we will post the entire recording of this and you can keep asking questions. That data equity community forum is not a membership site, it's a public good. Anybody who wants to can ask a question there, post a resource. There's a really unexpectedly active job board. So you can always do that too. All right. So is there anybody, I'm going to go through the chat, but is there anybody in the room that wants to turn their microphone on, ask a question, or share an idea, point us in the direction of things that you're working on? If you want to, you can. There's a lot of people here today, so it would probably work best if you're in the room and you want to turn your mic on, for you to just raise your hand using the Zoom raise your hand function, which is under reactions. But if you don't know how to do that, you can just turn your microphone on and that would be okay. Alexa, hi. Hi, how you doing?
Sorry, I couldn't
No
figure out how to
worries.
unmute myself on my phone.
We gotcha.
Um, it's so nice to see you again. Thank you so much for hosting these. I really appreciate them. My question is, when you talk about algorithms and how they're not purely these unbiased and um, they're just not unbiased tools. Do you have any resources that you could share with us to equip us with arguments for these tools not being unbiased? Because I have run into the instance of having to talk to somebody about these tools not being unbiased, but I recognize that I lack the vocabulary or the arguments or the proof that these tools need to be, because they're human tools, they need to always be considered susceptible to bias.
It is great to see you again, Alexa. I'm glad you could make it today. And also a continued shout out to, I think it was Leo who shared the phone number. And yes, so that idea that a quantitative tool, when used correctly, can be unbiased, is really the fundamental issue that we all count as trying to work on. So what I am trying to do is, or what we are all working together to try and do is, first of all, find ways to break through that myth in our own mind, because we've all been deeply trained to believe that as long as we just can get some objective data and do an objective analysis, we're going to get some objective evidence. And all three of those steps are unachievable myths. So, in terms of examples and language, I will add a link in under the recording in the data equity forum of kind of the slides and the language that we do around predictive modeling, because predictive modeling is really what most algorithms that people use today are. But essentially what it's going to say is what I said today, which is when you're building a predictive model, you have to optimize it to work well for somebody or some sets of communities. It isn't possible to build a predictive algorithm that's good for everybody. And if you're talking to people who are really technical, one of the things that you can ask if you're looking for some specific language, and this is true for anybody who has a vendor that's trying to get them to like buy some machine learning tool, or whose funder or colleagues are trying to say, like, you have to use this predictive algorithm, it's making everything so much easier. Ask them to see, I think the technical term is confusion matrix, but maybe don't use that. Ask them to see the table that shows how well this model works, whatever they're trying to sell you. How well does this model work for the different groups of people that are important to you? And any vendor that is trying to sell you a machine learning tool or a predictive tool can absolutely produce this table. They often don't want to produce this table because it's not in their kind of economic favor, but it's absolutely in your economic favor. It's a very, very simple table to produce. If they can't produce this table, you 100% should not be buying anything database from them because they aren't equipped. But they can produce the table. They just don't want to produce the table. Ask to see the table and then use that table to have conversations about the fact that there's no such thing as a value neutral predictive model or a value neutral machine learning model. And can we optimize this machine learning tool or predictive model towards the community or the accuracy or risk assessment needs of your project? Again, if you want to use the equity terms, does this work better for first generation kids or second generation kids? If you're in a very unfortunate position where you can't talk about equity, you can say, does this only predict really well for 60% of the kids in our college, because that's not good enough? Like the return on investment is not good enough. Those words will also work, even though they don't have the words equity in them. Or the risk assessment on this machine learning tool isn't going to work. It doesn't meet the needs of our college. Those are also words that don't have the word equity in them that will get you to the same place. And again, I'm not saying that this is a good situation to be in, but it's a situation that many of us find ourselves in. Great. You're welcome. Anybody else in the room want to ask a question? Hi, Bobby. How are you?
Hi, Heather. This is my first time joining the VORCAN because I got assigned to work on equity data for my current position. So I'm looking forward to join your team in the upcoming classes about data primary and the core class. So my question is, when you spend equity is raised one of the good approaches to start from. So when you have a project, and then the project, one factor to consider is about race/ethnicity. Is this a good way to start considering the equity approach, or there are other ways?
Great question. Happy that you're joining us and looking forward to having you in some of the upcoming courses. And that is a great, great question. So essentially, part of that question is if we're doing an equity project, should step one be consider race and ethnicity and how that's showing up in your data? And race and ethnicity is a very important element of equity in our world, and then, of course, of equity in our data. But it isn't the only element. It's really important that we broaden the definition of equity or data equity to mean all forms of alignment with human priorities, to make sure that we're making choices in our data that treat the people who are present in our data fairly and with the intentions that are appropriate for our context and our evidence needs. Sometimes it can be used as a synonym. When people say, I'm working on a data equity project, when they're talking to me, they often mean I'm working on a project in which we have collected race and ethnicity data, and we're going to disaggregate our results by race and ethnicity. And sometimes that's really, really helpful and good for the people in your data. And frankly, sometimes it's really unhelpful and bad for the people in your data. Sometimes we actually want to maintain that indivisibility. We want to retain the idea that we're going to analyze everybody in our data and not reify differences. Other times, due to the purpose of our project, it's quite important that we do highlight differences and that we do very carefully choose proxies for what's creating different experiences or what contexts or environments people live in. So kind of the answer is kind of yes and no. And we're going to talk about it a lot more. I really want to amplify what Christopher is saying in the chat. Remember that we have been working on this stuff long before we were using the word equity. And that is so true. Using data to quantitative data to produce evidence that is useful and transparent and accurate is inherently equitable. Like we've been talking about equity a lot because it is incredibly important. And I'm, again, in no way saying you should stop using the word equity or that the choices for accuracy or usefulness are more important. They are not. What we're talking about today is what to do if you find yourself in a very unpleasant and unfortunate and less optimal situation where you need to put in a grant and you can't say the word equity, or somebody's handed you a data project and they're literally in their contract are saying things like, you cannot use the word equity. How are you going to justify paying really close attention to the choices that you're making in the data, this kind of set of tools that we've developed because they're good for equity? How are you going to still use those tools? And that's what we're talking about today. Yes, Sam, all models are wrong. Some models are useful, with some of the equity questions being, who is it most wrong and least wrong for? Who is it most useful and least useful for? Exactly. You can kind of boil it down to that. And you can ask those questions by paying attention to the choices in your data, even if you are not using the word equity or not using the word racism or not using the word sexism. You can still ask those exact questions using all kinds of statistical diagnostic tools. Exactly. Yeah, no, I agree. Like it's not this, I wouldn't, with Lori say, sometimes I think equity has become a hashtag and people use the word equity without really thinking it through. And that's a big part of the work that We All Count does, is help people avoid using equity as a hashtag, avoid having a lot of narrative or rhetoric about equity without actually doing equity in your data. Yes. So I want to, if anybody else in the room wants to talk, go ahead, raise your hand. I want to shout out a couple of people who I care a lot about. Are like, it's very hard to kind of move from person to robot. And I agree. We developed kind of that thought process of how would we talk about this project if there were no humans in it, as a way to get our brains to kind of practice framing all the really important reasons to pay attention to choices, even when they're not having an immediate short-term effect on a human. It's just our kind of tool for thinking that through. If you don't like the robot thing, like, that's certainly not prescriptive. I bet you can find a better way. Let me know when you have your better way. And I will happily amplify it. Okay. So we are out of time, and I'm madly looking up because because I was preparing these slides, I did not look up, but I do know we have a very good guest next Friday. I'm not gonna be able to look it up. Anyways, we have a very good guest next Friday. It is advertised on the Talking Data Equity page. I highly recommend that you check out the Talking Data Equity page. I'm going to put the page in the chat. We always update that with the next guest. Sometimes there's last minute changes to guests or topics. You can almost always find them there. And if you sign up to receive the invites on that page, you will also get links where you can add these to your calendar if that's your thing. I cannot tell you. Oh, thank you. See, what a fantastic community. Everyone's telling me, great, it's Tanya Golas-Boza. Oh, from the Race, Capitalism, and Law Lab. Yeah, next Friday is going to be great. I've missed you so much while we were on our winter break. I'm so happy to be back. 2025 is going to be a great year. We're definitely going to have to stick together and work together. So if there's anybody you want to see or any special topics you want us to cover in Talking Data Equity, make sure you put them in the form on that Talking Data Equity page. I love you very much. I'll see you next Friday. Bye.